Thanks.
I'll pass it back to Nick to talk about the supplemental benefit, the SBMA. As my tongue
Easier
gets
to say.
tied.
All right, thanks, Mark. We also have good news on the SBMA. This is something we only talk to you about every 2 years, so I want to just give you a brief refresher course on the SBMA. Then I'll go over the results, which are very similar to what we've seen in the past. And lastly, I want to talk about future variants. It's like the DB program, it is sensitive to how the actual experience compares to the assumptions. But unlike the DB program, the difference here is that the benefits would be adjusted instead of the contributions if experience falls short of our expectations. So this is not exactly Stephen Hawking's brief history of time. It's just a brief history of SBMA because I think that's all we have time for. So the SBMA was created to restore purchasing power. Obviously, that was very important for a lot of folks after the 1970s and 1980s. You remember the inflation was very high. It is provided in addition to the 2% annual benefit adjustment. So already members retiring have some hedge against inflation, but it's historically has not been full amount. So the SBMA was created. It's funded by 2.5% annual state contributions. And just to point out the history, the purchasing power level was increased to 80% back in 2001. And about 10 years ago, it was increased to 85%. When it was increased to 85%, Ed and myself, and obviously we worked with the board, we spent a lot of time talking about how, if we're going to go to 85%, what could we do as a downside protection? And what we ended up with, it was a sliding scale where it's at 85%, but we also do a projection at that point to make sure that 85% still makes sense, and we allow for a reduction in the benefits down to the 80% purchasing power level if necessary. And there's a number of regulations, in fact, you don't go from 85 to 81 year if that was to happen. But there's a lot of thought that went into this, and we think it's really a good setup and has worked well over the years. So assumptions and methods, very similar to the DB program. I would point out a couple of things, though. The investment return, DB program, investment return is really what causes a lot of ups and downs in the funded ratio, whereas for the SBMA, the 7% is guaranteed. That is, whatever the DB program assumption is, that is what is credited to the SBMA. So it doesn't have the volatility of the investment return assumption. Where the volatility can occur is in inflation, which currently is 2.75%. The reason you can get a lot of volatility is it's a leverage benefit, and I'll kind of talk about the impact of that. But if you think about it, if inflation is 2% and you're getting a 2% annual benefit adjustment, really you're not losing much in purchasing power, so you're not going to drop down to the 85% level. So you're going to get zero benefit out of this, potentially. But if inflation was 3 or 4%, then it could be a very valuable benefit. So it is very leveraged, and that obviously impacts the costs. And lastly, how long people live actually has a bigger impact on this program than the DB program, because so much of the benefits are paid, towards the end of a member's lifetime. So how long people live really drives costs also. So getting to the results, and just to remember, I called this a projection. It's not called a valuation. Really, a projection is somewhat of a lower threshold for funding. But once again, we had a lot of discussion about this, and we believe it's a reasonable approach. The threshold is sufficiency through 2089. So obviously that is a long period to be able to provide the benefits. Basically, the results are based on the requirements of the Education Code and SBMA regulations, purchasing power level should remain at 85%. And I note the margin increased from the prior projection we did 2 years ago. The main reason for that was because the assumption for future inflation was decreased from 3 to 2.75%. As I mentioned, it's very leveraged, so lowering the inflation lowers your projected benefit payments that are going to be paid out of the SBMA. And really, to really kind of drive home that point of how leveraged it is, if you take a person retiring at age 65 who lived to age 90, If your inflation is 2.75% compared to 3%, that if the actual inflation going forward is 2.75, that would be half as much. The value of benefits would be half as much than if inflation is 3%. Or the other way to look at it is if we set inflation at 2.75% and it is actually 3%, the cost is twice as much as we're estimating. So that is kind of the leveraging that we're talking about. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, of how we measured that. It's on the next page. But first, I'd mention that, as I said, there's a margin, and by margin, we mean, hey, we've said it's projected to be sufficient at 85%. It would also be projected to be sufficient at 86, all the way up to 93%. So there is a pretty nice margin. So 1 year of inflation is not going to dramatically impact this program. It would be only inflation over time. And to model that, we use what we call a stochastic model. So basically, we forecast possible inflation scenarios, a wide variety. On average, those inflation scenarios average 2.75%, but there's a wide variety of them. And basically showed a full third of the time we ended up in situations, well, almost a third of the time, 29%, where we would need to reduce the level of benefits from the 85% level. And so I think I'll conclude with that. To try to get back us on time, because Mark did such a good job. So if there's any questions.
It's a
Pressure on
competition,
you, didn't
Yeah,
the actuarial race.
yes. So I'm happy to take any questions on the SBMA.
Of course, we have them. Okay, Sharon.
So Nick, could you go back to the previous slide or I just want to make sure I understand. So why staff is recommending staying at 85% really is really the main reason about inflation? I just want to understand.
I'm going to take from our perspective why it says this in our report. Right now, 85%, that is all that can be granted. So our recommendation under the current current education code is this can be 85%. But I'll turn it over to Dave to talk about why we would talk about maybe changing that cap at 85%.
Yeah, so basically that's why we have two items in front of you today. The first one is to deal with the authority you have under both regulation and statute today, which is to set the level anywhere between 80 and 85%.
Right.
That's the authority you have today in statute. So the recommendation is based on what you've seen to keep it at 85%. Then the next item, which we can cover in a second, we'll talk about what could be done considering the fact we have an excess surplus in this program. So,
Okay, then I'll leave that to, but I guess just, again, so the 85, so the range we have is 80 to 85, staff's recommending 85. And I guess it's fine. Well, I'll wait till the next section and then we can go from there.
Paul?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, why is the discussion always with respect to the sufficiency in 2089? What is the significance of 2089?
so this is set in regulations that the board adopted. Maybe Mark and Nick can add to it. That was prior to my time here, but I believe that there were a lot of discussion over what the time period should be, and the regulations were passed in 2009, and a funding sufficiency period of 80 years was selected at the time, which was 2089. And as per the regulations the board adopted, beginning in 2019, so 10 years after that point, the board can revisit whether a 2089 time period is still appropriate. So you can expect us to come back to you probably at the time of the next time we do the actual work, that we're probably going to start talking as to whether or not we should extend that funding period beyond 2089, but it is set in regulation. I don't know if Mark and Nick, if you know anything behind the original 80-year period?
There's nothing magic about it. There was a lot of discussion. I mean, we were doing projections out 200 years.
We talked about a rolling.
Yeah, and then we were doing some out 40 years. And that decision was, made outside of our auspices, and we just, we ran the numbers through, but obviously, if Ed was here, I'm sure he could recite the whole thing, but. Yeah.
Watching Jack right now.
Or he might be purposely away from a computer so he doesn't watch.
So, yeah, there's nothing magic about it.
Okay.
Although I think, actually, no, I mean, it actually, you know what, now that I remember the conversation, is the 80, actually, there was something behind it. It was, if a teacher was hiring at 25,
I had to be.
80 years would take them to 105. That's basically about as long as you expect them to live. So that's a projected sufficiency was for the population that existed at that point in time.
Thank you.
Karen?
Okay, so on this item, if we approve this item or go with the recommendation, it's at 85. But then the next item has different connotations of that 85%. I guess my question is, how does this item affect item E?
They're both independent. So
They're
you
both
can, yeah, you
independent?
can vote on this. And remember that the next item, I'll go into more details when we get to that.
It's about the surplus.
It's about the surplus, and you cannot set anything higher. All we can do, it's all going to be about what we tell the legislature.
Right,
So-
okay. And it has to be done legislatively.
Correct.
Right, this is within your powers
okay.
of the current statute,
Okay.
really, and we're not reducing it, so it's kind of obvious it would stay the same. Yeah.
Sharon?
I would move staff recommendation.
Alrighty, is there a second? Alrighty, I just had a couple questions. And David was talking about the next time we have the valuation is done as of the end of the year, or the end of the fiscal year 2019, so the board wouldn't be getting that until 2020, correct?
Correct.
So I just wanted to make sure that even though the date in the write-up says 2019, the board actually wouldn't be taking any action until spring of 2020.
Unless you wanted us to come back sooner. This is, again,
Right.
the regulations adopted
That's
by
true.
the board.
That's true.
Say that we do evaluation at
Every other year.
least every 2 years.
Yeah.
So right now, we're following the every 2 year schedule. If there was a desire by this board for us to come back next year with another evaluation, I'm sure Nick and Mark will not oppose to performing the work and provide the information a year from now.
So the 2019 wasn't set in statute the first time that we could do something else other than?
No,
the
it was just like it cannot be done any earlier than 2019.
19,
Yes.
great. And then, Mark and Nick, I know in your write-up you talked about that with the surplus, it's sufficient to pay purchasing power benefits at 93% through 89. Did you project how long we could keep 85? Does that go into perpetuity? I
Oh,
thought I
yeah.
read something like that, but I
Yeah,
wasn't
and
sure.
it's one of those things where once you start going on one path, it's gonna keep going that way. So once you get to 2089, it's unlikely to
drop.
decline after that.
Alrighty, thank you. Alrighty, Dave, you're up. Hang on a second, Dave, is his mic on? Can we turn maybe the volume up? I wanted to make sure that we could hear you. I'm not sure the mic was on loud enough for you. I think it's on. You're good.
I'm good?
Oh, there you go, that's better. Thank you.
Anyway, I'm Dave Davini, and I'm a retired member. And I was here 2 years ago and listened to the conversation. At that time, the surplus, or the extra money that's in this fund, was at $5.6 billion. We learned as retired members that in fact could fund purchasing power up to 91% until 2089, which is 71 years. When you're retired and you're looking at 71 years into the future, most of us are not going to be around 71 years from now. We don't think that far in advance. Some of us don't even buy green bananas. But the fact is that, that we were told at that time that this money is available. This money is a special fund that does not affect the unfunded liability. So by giving retired members some relief, we have to lose 15% of our purchasing power in order to get help under this. It's the board's job to help all members, and retired members do count. You know, we're out there, we're still alive, we have some problems. At the time, 2 years ago, we raised some concerns. I know I did myself. And so you did some studies. You found out that for those that retired before 99, almost 40% were living on monthly allowances of $2,500 or less. Actually, it's lower than $2,500. And that of that group, 7,000 were living on monthly allowances of $950 or less. These are very low incomes. These are real people. Many of them spent years, 25, 30 years in education before they retired. They are hurting. The money is there to help these people. For 2 years, we heard the reports. Yeah, they are out there. Yeah, they do hurt. This board, I believe, can do something. You have legislative advocates. You sponsor legislation. We have advocates. We can sponsor legislation. We can work together. There needs to be resolve, and when you looked at the business plan earlier, I commented that something in the business plan should say we need to address the needs of retired members. That probably dropped. I didn't see it written into the business plan. But it's time to look really at the needs of retired members and stop kicking this ball down the road for 2 more years.
Thank you, Dave.
So, well,
Thank you, Dave.
okay.
Irene?
Thank you. My name is Irene Wetzel. I'm president, serving as CalRTA, and which is California Retired Teachers Association. But I just had to start out with heart, because I know you are responsible and reactive to heart issues. And if you have grandparents, you have your future as a 85-year-old to think about the joints not working, the bones become very brittle, and it's hard to do things. So teachers have spent their life caring for others. They continue in their retirement life, and then it reverses. They need care, and care costs money. So the factor that you look at is not exactly what the rest of the population is looking at. They need more support at that time in their life. So I'd like for you to think about the most senior retirees, because we're all going to get there. And I want you to know that CalRTA's platform is based upon the SBMA really supporting those first and foremost as you look at your options in the next segment. But we would like to have more facts and work with you, the CalSTRS board, to not wait 2 years to get legislation ready in 2019 that hopefully our new governor will sign. And so we do want to move forward, and I want to thank you for your attention and your willingness to help the most senior retirees.
Loretta?
Loretta Tagenberger from United Teachers Los Angeles, retired. I'm I'm not going to repeat what's been said. These people, I see them every week, every day. I know them. These are they're hardworking people. They were the teachers that taught all the, some of us. I taught these people, or I taught with these people. They are hurting. There are some people we have at UTLA retired, the range from the 2,000 up, they get 8,000 a month. The 8,000 a month are not hurting. I'm not speaking for them to need the increase. I'm speaking for those people that I see, that I know, they are hurting. Can you imagine living off of a couple of thousand a month? No other income. No other income. They need this 85% upped as high as we can go. 90, it would be 93. Please think when you vote, and we need the money for those people out there. I represent all these, and some of you, Jack has been down there, Chris has been down there, Dana's been down there. You people know what our people look like. Well, some of our people are well-dressed, and they had husbands that had money. I'm not speaking for all the people that have had all that, and they invested wisely. But I'm speaking for the ones that are hurting. We need the 85 upped, and that's it. Please vote, get it up to 93%.
Thank you, Loretta. Alrighty. That is the end of that item. The resolution is on 182. We do have a motion to approve. Any other further questions, comments? All in favor say aye. All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? The motion passes. Moving on to 3E, the options on the use of supplemental benefit maintenance account.
Yes.
Dave, you're gonna
present
kick this one
correct.
off, right?
I'll give a break, Mark and Nick, and they're here to answer any questions if you have about the information in the items. That they were part of all of the calculations involved in the item.
Okay.
So this is an item that's required by statute. If we determine when we do the regular actual work that we could sustain a level more than 85%. So by statute, the board is required to present options to the legislature to consider. Now, that's been in statute for several years. The one point I'd like to make, and we had some wording on TRB 184 around this, is PEPRA in 2013 changed a little bit the landscape. When PEPRA was passed, one of the provision said that you should no longer have benefit increases to members in pension fund that are retroactive, that apply to past service. So one of the limitations potentially facing this is the fact that current statute says that would sort of prevent SBMA benefits from going around 85%. Now, we stated it in the agenda item. In order to raise the SBMA level above 85%, it's going to require legislative changes. If the legislature had appetite to do this, they could certainly change at the same time the imposition set by PEPRA and exempt the SBMA from it. But it's likely going to be, a harder battle than it may have been in the past, because there would have to be a need for someone to agree to, if you want to lift the restriction that was put by PEPRA and statute. So all this being said, what we decided to present in front of you, where you have several options that could be recommended to the legislature to consider. 5 of them. Option number 5 is the one recommended by staff, which is to leave the purchasing power at 85%. Just to point one thing out, by statute, we're required to have at least one of the option to apply only to retirees that retired before 1999. So that is option number 1. What we tried to do this year as well, in answer to some of the comments that we just heard from some of our stakeholders, option 3 and option 4 are options that would really benefit the most some of our older retirees and some of our retirees that have lower benefit levels. So in the interest of time, I will just, I'm more than happy to go into more details in some of the options presented to you. But right now, again, this is from staff's perspective. We are, especially when considering some of the information that Nick and Mark presented earlier, the risk of high inflation could quickly deplete that program. And even if you look last year, for the first time in 8 years, we are now in calendar year 2017, inflation was 3.4%. So it's already starting to creep up. So for the first time in 8 years, we're now seeing inflation above what the board assumes at 2.75%. So again, you have 5 options in front of you, 4 of which are with respect to that would recommend that the legislature consider increases in the SBA benefit. And regardless of your decision today, what we have done in the past is we will provide a copy of the item in front of you to the legislature with a cover letter from you. Now the question is, what should that cover letter say? Should it say that you recommend it stays at 85%? Or should you recommend to the legislature that they consider one of the options presented? And again, just so to be clear, you're not limited by these options. For example, one of the stakeholders said you should raise it to 93%. This was not one of the options presented. It could certainly be an option if this is what the board wanted to consider. With this, I'm done with my comments, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Harry?
If I wasn't having a chat with Sharon, I probably would have heard better what you said. At one point, you said there was an option that would have provide the greatest relief for the most senior members of the system? Or was that option 4?
Option 3 and 4. So option 3, the one we presented, was to say, if you are receiving a benefit from the program today, so today that means you had to retire in 1994 or earlier, we would increase the SBMA benefit you're receiving today by 25%. So that would only apply to those that retired in 1994 or earlier, which is why it's one of the least costly alternative. And on this one, too, the way we made it is, it was an idea we had. This could be something that the board revisit on an annual basis. Instead of making a long-term commitment, one of the least expensive way to approach this would be, what if every year you just decide if you want to grant something in that year only, with no commitment to repeat that same benefit a year from now? So the way to look at it would be, if you were to choose option 3, it would be like saying, if someone is currently receiving $100 from the SBMA program, just for the upcoming year, we would give them an additional $25. And then a year later, you would have to decide as a board if you want to, again, give them the same. So that would be probably one of the least expensive way to approach this, because it would not commit you to an ongoing increase. It would be something you would revisit every year.
And so, may I, Dana? Can I continue?
Mm-hmm.
So, 1994, without having, someone mentioned that there were 7,000, I don't know if these figures are accurate or not. They don't have to be precise, but are they in the ballpark that there are 7,000 members that are living, that get $950 less, $950 a month? They retired before 1999. Some of those numbers that were circulated.
I believe.
Are they accurate, somewhat accurate?
I believe they're in the right ballpark. I think it was an item presented to you by Tom Buffalo a couple months ago, and I didn't get a chance to validate them, but it seems reasonable.
Reasonable, yeah. So without landing on a specific option, my interest would be to find a way to provide additional relief to the most impacted retired members that were represented in some of the comments made today, without compromising too greatly this aspect of the benefit. So what would you recommend, David?
Myself.
To accomplish that, yeah.
To accomplish that, option 4 is another option that we provided there. Option 4 was What if we were to provide a higher purchasing power, but only on the first, for example, on the first $20,000 benefit or the first $10,000 benefit? That's another option we put there, because that would be, if your only income is $10,000, then you would really benefit from it. Option 3 would be, for some member, maybe more valuable than option 4, because option 3 would really benefit those that retired like 20, 30 years, like that retired in the 1970s and the 1960s. That would really help them, because that would simply increase their SBME benefits. I guess it all depends. If you want to reach a greater number of people, then option 4 would do the trick. If you want to, option 3 would probably impact some of our older population the most, because it would really increase their SBME benefit
So
by
4
20.
captures a larger audience, 3
Yes.
captures the most, what we perceive to be
Our-
perhaps the oldest.
The oldest, not necessarily the ones with the lowest benefit. We're talking about the oldest member. And the other thing to keep in mind here is you have to, I don't want to say you want to be careful, but there's, in 2000 and 2001, the legislature adopted the minimum guaranteed benefit for our CalSTRS retirees. So as long as they had 20 years of service, they received a minimum benefit of at least $15,000 a year. And when the legislation was passed, that became their new benefit, and it was considered at that time to be fully protected by inflation. So for these individuals, we restarted the clock to measure whether or not they had lost purchasing power. So we have many of our retirees that could potentially have retired in the 1960s and 70s that receive a benefit increase in 2000 to bring them up to, let's say, 15,000. And these members, although they've been retired for 40 plus years, they are not subject to SBMA today, because the benefit they're getting.
Was subjected to.
Correct. So that's why if option 3 has the benefit of really impacting the ones that never received the minimum guaranteed benefit, but are receiving SBMA today. So that's probably a population that has a lot of members that never made it to 20 years of service as well. So it's kind of so it depends what you're trying. But if you're trying to really reach some of our older members that earn less than $15,000 and $20,000 a year, option 3 will do the trick better than any of the other options.
And I apologize to my colleagues for taking so much
No,
time
you're
here, but I
fine,
really
you're
want to
fine.
understand what I'm
And
doing.
I want to jump in really quick if I can.
Sure.
David, this report has to go to the legislature after our valuation. How soon after the valuation does it have to go to the legislature?
How soon? I'm not sure. I don't know what the requirement is by statute, how soon. Historically, we've sent it to the legislature shortly thereafter, like in May, or like within the month.
Right.
But
Jack, do you know?
But you could send a placeholder report. There's a lot of ways to deal with that issue if you want to have further
So
discussion.
if the board wanted to have further discussion, wasn't comfortable making a decision day, we could bring it.
Or with the options in it and not say, we recommend keeping it at 85%, but be silent for the moment on that and actually invite discussion with the legislature.
Okay.
I don't see
As we got into this, I wanted to make sure y'all
I
knew
think it's to be hard
what our
to,
options were.
if you want to keep that door open, I think it'd be hard to sort out an option right now this minute for
That's
the
what my
board. I think-
concern was. I just
think
wanted
it'd be-
everybody to know if
yeah.
we had another chance at it.
Yeah, I
what-
think that'd be
what that would
painful, in a good way. But I think, go ahead, Brett.
The timeline is, there's a report that has to be submitted to the legislature. And then any proposals have to be submitted within 60 days of the report. So if you submit the required report, but you want to submit the options, you have 60 days after you submit the report.
But you could submit these options too and then begin the
Right, right, right.
discussion. I mean, I think there's ways that, I don't think you should let
Okay.
the procedure tie you up. You want to get to the heart of what you want to do.
Okay, so I have Karen, Jackie, Sharon, Jacqueline, and Paul, and Harry still does have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Jack. The risk of inflation seems to be something that you said, that's probably something that the big concern for us?
That's the biggest
So
concern.
I want to get beyond that.
Yeah.
We've been talking about inflation. It's going to come eventually. It's going to come next year. It's going to come 10 years. And there's so many efforts to keep inflation contained. That's outside of our control. What I'd like us to do, if it's possible, I think we should eliminate those options that we don't want to deal with. For me, there seems to be a compelling argument based on the information and what I understand the facts to be as I sit here now. A compelling argument to provide an increase to the most impacted and senior members of the system, and that we have the ability to move in that direction. And I would hope my colleagues would agree with me that we find a way to do that.
Well, again, another option would be to add more, beyond the actuarial piece of this today, add more documentation from our other report that Mr. Davini actually mentioned, so that we focus the legislature's attention on that population in the report. We could marry that to that data that we provided to you earlier in the year. But I would say that in the past, when we've discussed this with legislative staff, the inflation issue is raised very strongly.
Sure.
So
But
your
sitting
point's
here-
well taken.
Sitting here now, it appears to me that by making an adjustment, that modest adjustment would have a meaningful impact in the lives of some of our members. At the same time, it would have a minimal impact in terms of a dollar effect on the balance of this part of the portfolio. It's for that reason why I think we need to do something to provide these members with an increase. What that specifically is, I don't know what it is. Thank you, Dana.
Sure. Karen?
This excitement, this item got me a lot of inquiry, and I talked to staff about it. So when you talk about the report that we have to do and the options that are required if we go beyond the 85, or the options because we have a surplus, that still requires legislation, right? So no matter what option we choose,
Yes.
it's still going to require
You're just making
legislation.
suggestions, the legislature work on
Correct.
an idea
Okay, I just
that we
wanted
know
to
will
make
be.
sure that people knew that, because, and then
moderated.
legislation kind of takes its toll, roundabout way anyway, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you want to come up with your best thoughts of what's needed by the membership. You have two obstacles on the legislative side. One would be the perception that inflation is a high risk. The second would be the issue around retroactive benefits and the Pepper issue that will be perceived by some as an obstacle.
Well, I've looked at the options, but I didn't understand the option 3 and 4, and how that would, because 3 is one time, correct?
Yeah,
Option
this
3
was
is
an
a
idea we had.
one-time.
And also keep in mind that those options are just ideas.
Right.
And again, I think
Better ideas than what I have, but.
as we, if we suggest to the legislature that they look into increasing the benefit, you don't have to pick an option today.
Right.
We can have those discussions later, because there could be 50 different ways of doing it. And I would probably recommend for us that if you decide that you want to go forward with this, I think one of the first steps we should do is maybe sit down with our stakeholders to see what do they have in mind, to make sure we find something that really targets, the group that everyone is really concerned about.
Okay, and I understand that this part of money is not part of the unfunded liability, right? It's a separate part of
It's
money.
a totally separate fund,
And
correct.
so we have a big surplus, and it seems like all of these options only take a little bit of that surplus. Am I correct in assuming that?
It depends. I think option 2 is where there was an option where, I think if you look at the cost under option 2 to go to a 90% purchasing power, we've identified the long-term cost of this one to be like close to $10 billion. So I wouldn't consider that a small, but option 3 and 4, the reason we put them there, because they target a specific group of members, they tend to have a lower cost impact. especially the one where it would be just on an annual basis. This is where if you want to stay away from having a big cost impact, that's the one myself I would recommend, which is just you revisit the situation on an annual basis.
Karen, I want to add that one other actuarial point, David, about, it is true about what you said about the unfunded, but we always do have to remember that rain or shine, we credit this program with the 7% investment assumption. That's very important to remember.
Yeah.
If,
Okay,
Like
and
when we
this-
had when we had negative return,
Right.
it still got 7.
Right.
Or
And
it got
then-
8, actually.
And then the money comes from the state, correct?
Yes,
The money comes from the state,
only
not,
the state, correct.
not
The
the members.
employers and the members
the
are
members
not,
do not contribute to
and
this
neither the
fund.
employers, correct.
Okay.
The state of California only.
Okay,
Jacqueline?
thank you.
I have a question sort of shifting focus a little bit, and that's about the school, the 5 million that comes from the school lands.
right?
Why does it go to that account?
It's
Is it,
set
is there,
in-
is it
it's
set in statute that
It's
it
set in
goes
statute
specifically to
it
that
goes
account?
That was the
account.
deal made, yeah. It was a
Okay.
political solution.
I was just curious because I know that sort of constitutionally it was supposed to be for the benefit of, you know, of schools and of public education, but I didn't know what the nexus was for it specifically going to the SBMA.
Of the school
Okay.
lands.
Yeah, the school lands, as opposed to, say, the unfunded liability.
That's the legacy of Elk Hills.
Okay. Thank you.
Before your time.
We actually got that one done. Sharon?
So David, I think that's what I would like to see is perhaps you and your team work with stakeholders. I feel like I would like to hear or see more data on, as members mentioned a couple of things, there was a comment about, you know, people working 25 years and getting $900. In general, that seems shocking to me, and maybe I would just like to have more facts and information about, because my understanding is people who have lower payments typically have lower service credit, right? In general? I mean, in general, yeah. So I think it would help me in terms of figuring out how to provide relief, but in a prudent manner, to have some kind of breakdown. I think for me, I feel like providing relief to those who really are at the, you know, $900 a month end of things, to Loretta's comments, you know, those that are sort of the most needy. But I just don't know what the numbers are. So it'd be helpful to get some visibility on that. I don't know how many people we have in those categories. And
We could certainly bring back an item. We actually, a couple years ago, we used to have an item that was presented to Benefit and Services on an annual basis that kind of reported back on the, it was called the Purchasing Power
Sufficiency
Protection
or
Report,
something like that.
that would kind of provide statistical information like
Yeah.
this, how many people are receiving the benefits from SBMA, how much purchasing power have they lost, and it is information we keep track internally on an annual basis. We could certainly do an item either at this board, at the board level, or the Benefit and Services Committee, if you're interested. With respect to this item, to the other thing you can consider is maybe in your recommendation is you know, we have the options here. We can present those options to the legislature, but in your letter, you can say that you would like to start dialogue with us, the legislature, and stakeholders to select potentially a different option that's presented here, and maybe the recommendation can say we want something that targets our most needed
yes.
retirees.
I like that idea. I like the open dialogue, because it's certainly not, I mean, I'm concerned about inflation. We know it's just gonna go up. I'm concerned about PEPRA, and I know Harry, but you know, I'm concerned about PEPRA and the politics of, you know, things, and who knows what's gonna happen with the new governor. But I just think we could probably make a more informed decision with more data and then more conversation with our stakeholders. So I like that idea of opening the dialogue and having our letter be sort of communicating that to the legislature. That
So
would be my recommendation.
We could move forward then after this meeting, at least with the legislative report, if you like, with that perspective, and then add some information around the population itself that was kind of missing from this discussion. So, I just want to say it back to you so we're on the same page. So we would be presenting these options just as a continuum of things the board is looking at. We are not making a recommendation to keep the benefit at 85%, but rather opening that discussion with the stakeholders and you, the legislature, on these options. Is that a fair?
Well, we still have a couple people, so
Can I
let's
just-
wait to wrap that up.
Oh, okay. Well, that's my current
That's where
point.
we are right now.
That's what I'm hearing.
And
Okay.
Can we have, is it possible to get that data present? I guess I'm thinking, since we're having the discussion here, that we should probably have the discussion in the regular board in July?
Yeah,
Could we
but
do that?
I think it's taking multiple meetings to do
Sure,
that.
no, I'm
Yeah.
just saying, the data
Yeah.
we're talking about, but about the demographics of how many people are getting the 1,000 or less,
Yeah.
or just to get more visibility into the members that are being most impacted financially. That would be great. Okay, done.
Paul?
Great, thank you. This has been a great discussion, and I'm completely in agreement with my fellow board members that to the extent that we can do something that helps those who have really lost the most purchasing power, I think that would be great. You know, I had a mother-in-law who recently passed away who was 90 years old and was a CalSTRS retiree, and I have an aunt who's 91 who's a retiree, and I know the impact because I've seen it with both of them. I want to step back though and try to get a little bit better understanding about some of the things about this program, because the SBMA is not a vested benefit. The vested benefit is that if there's money in the SBMA account, it's available and SBMA benefits would be paid, and the state has an obligation to contribute to the SBMA account. But if the SBMA account runs out of money,
There's nothing.
nobody has any obligation to continue to make SBMA payments. Is that correct?
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
So,
Hang on a
Guarantee
sec.
is around the contribution.
so right, it's around the
That's what we
contribution.
that's what
The
we
state has a
litigated.
responsibility to make that contribution.
Contraction, yes.
Right.
That's what we litigated.
Right. We litigated it, we won. They have to contribute.
That's
But,
why there's a law.
but if we run out,
Right.
then there's no money to pay SBMA
There you go.
benefits. Okay. So the important thing is that we have to make sure that we don't do something that leads to the point where we run out of money. Now, the other question, and maybe I've got this wrong, but all of the analysis that Milliman has done, all of the assumption that we could survive till 2089, paying 93%, is all assuming that we pay the full improvement factor to all of our retirees, right?
Just to correct, when you say full improvement factor,
The
you talk
annual
about,
benefit
you talk
enhancement.
about the 2%
The
annual.
2% improvement factor.
Yes,
right.
correct.
Okay. But that's not a vested benefit to everybody, is my understanding. What?
It is now to those that were after a certain date. After that.
But not to
Well,
the,
but-
but you are correct, not to the ones that are
314.69.
currently receiving SBMA today because they retired before the funding plan.
Right, so people who retired before the funding plan
Right.
do not have vested, are not vested in the 2% improvement factor. Those who retire after are vested in the 2% improvement factor.
Yep.
So I just want to throw out that there is another risk here. It may be, it's a political risk, it may not be a material risk, but it's a judgment, it's a political call. But we haven't looked at what would happen. I mean, what would happen if the full 2% improvement factor weren't paid?
So, Jack, can you answer Paul? Because that was part of our analysis when we did the funding plan. That if that annual benefit enhancement went away, how much earlier the SBMA would have to kick in and what effect it would have on the fund of the SBMA and how
That's
quickly
quite
that could be
serious,
depleted if it had to kick in earlier.
Do you remember the numbers on it, David? But it's quite serious, yeah.
No, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Let's see,
No,
and-
not
and-
today.
And Mark's
I
Mark's
don't
going,
wanna
oh,
throw
I
a
wasn't
stink
here
bomb
then
in
either,
here,
but Nick,
because
you
I would
were.
love to figure out a way.
Okay.
But I also don't want us to sit here 10 years from now
Right.
and find that something went wrong and now all of the retirees, there's no money in the SBMA. Because the idea is that without putting numbers on it, that if the 2% improvement factor isn't paid, retirees get to that 85% point much quicker in their retirement, and they start drawing on money from the SBMA much quicker, and then it increases the likelihood of depletion. So I mean, I really,
Moving parts.
I don't like to raise this, but I think we have a responsibility to look at that. Again, I'd love to figure out a way, but I don't want to do it at the, you know.
Well,
and then
that's why
find
it
out
points
10
you to more
years from
temp-
now we don't, and maybe it's not a worry.
Well, I mean, those
But-
things point you more to ad hoc or temporary or flexible
Yes,
solutions
that's
rather
right.
than permanent fixed. I
right.
mean, that's why we ended up with the regulation the way it is. But I think for today, I mean,
And that's-
if the will of the group is to keep the door open and keep that conversation looking at maybe those other types of solutions, we can do that. And we're just talking about kind of what the tone of the report would look like at this point.
And knowing all of you, that's kind of where I was coming from about trying to find out what the timeline was. Because we don't do anything in a very, I don't want to say expedient, because sometimes we can be expedient, but these types of decisions, we like to have data, we like to mull it over, we like the sausage making part of it before we make that decision, and so I think we'd have to have all that information. Paul, you have anything else?
No, thank you very much.
Alrighty. Harry?
So I'm going to move the staff recommendation with some slight amendments that reflects the conversation. That, as Jack said, the tone of the communication would reflect the comments that we made, that there's an interest of the board to provide an additional support to our most impacted members. So the tone of the communication, we're not setting on an option, but, and obviously included in the communication would be as much data as you could provide. And as part of the amendment, which is to the staff recommendation, so not changing the intent of the recommendation, just making sure that the tone of the communication is right, is that as you said, David, directing the staff to enter into communications with the appropriate representatives of the retirement group to understand more clearly and precisely the population that we would like to be able to accommodate without compromising what Ms. Paul had mentioned, depleting this so being responsible about how we approach this. So it's a lot of amendments in there, but it's just really what it is the tone of the message, the tone, reaching out to the stakeholder affected groups and fine tuning what we're trying to accomplish.
But I
Yeah,
think,
Jack.
Harry, you were adjusting the recommendation just a bit. I want to make sure I don't, we follow your direction exactly. We have a sentence in there on the, I don't have the exact page number, page 6, but whatever the right,
It's
TRB.
TRB 188.
Yeah.
188, yep.
But we have a sentence that staff recommends the board present all options, which we would with everything you said, but recommends no change in the program be suggested to the legislature. So we're taking that off, you're saying, and actually changing that to more of an open dialogue of looking
We'd
at.
be open to making adjustments to accommodate and meet
Okay.
the needs of our most impacted members without compromising the long-term sustainability of this fund.
Right, perfect.
So
Okay.
Harry, I want to make sure I
I've got that.
understand the motion. So your motion is asking us, besides the letter where it says we want to explore the issue further, without having more, without being more verbose about it, you do want all the 5 options to go to the legislature with that letter? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I thought you had actually had said without the option, so I want to
No,
make sure I have that
keep the
right.
options in there,
Okay,
Including
Thank you.
5?
including,
including
No,
five.
including number 5.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
already. Do you have anything, is there a second to Harry's motion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Harry, do you have anything else to say on that?
No.
Karen, it's to you.
Could one of those options also include greater than 90?
Again, I think right now, I think the way the letter is going to be written is, I think the whole idea is to open up the dialogue, so we're not going to be limited by those options. So we'll
Okay.
make sure that the letter says we're not, these are just ideas, and let's start dialogue with stakeholders, legislature, to select an options that could be different than the one here. And something higher than 90% could be one of the options.
Okay. Okay.
Paul?
I think this is a good approach. I just want to make sure that we're saying we want dialogue, and we're going to get more information here, which might inform our dialogue, right? Okay, so we're not just passing it straight on to we're going to spend some more time talking here. Great, thank you.
Another
Thank you.
meeting, right, in July, and we'll be able to continue the conversation.
Okay,
But just one more thing.
go
And
ahead,
then just-
go ahead, click in. There you go.
Just to be also conscious of the legislative calendar too, because if we don't come back and do anything in July, the session's probably gonna, I think the session ends in September? So, yeah, August,
Are we in
September,
the,
so.
are we in the
how are
first
we-
year of a 2-year, or are we in the second year?
Second year, so,
Our staff know about that.
yeah. So anyway, so hopefully all those considerations will be taken. If we're gonna do any legislation, because
We were
in order
assuming
for
you
this to
meant the nine-
happen,
well, we were
we
assuming
would
you
have
meant
to amend
19.
it into something else.
It'll be the next session.
Ooh,
Yeah,
I was
I
assuming
think what we,
you.
let me,
Go
I'm
ahead.
not
let me
sure.
jump in. So instead of rushing it through this legislative session, I think it's more important for us to get it right. So I don't want to be hindered. I hope we won't be hindered by that.
Right.
Okay.
And the administration's perspective on this will be very important as well. We just haven't mentioned that in the discussion,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I just want to put that out there that, this does relate to funding and a lot of issues. So that we have to also talk to the administration.
Yeah,
And
but
you'll be within new.
bottom line is we wanna do something.
Yes.
I think the key language is
Yeah.
opening a dialogue.
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
opening a dialogue. Yeah.
Alrighty. All right, we've cleared our list. We do have several speakers that have been waiting to speak. Dave, go ahead.
I just want you to know that there is a reason that the board is required to address those that retired before 99, 2000. And that is because there was a split in the benefits or in the program. There's actually a 2-tiered system within CalSTRS. Those that retired before 99 and those that retired after. If you did option 1, you wouldn't have to worry about running out of money because you'll run out of members that retired before 99, 2000, long before you run out of money. We need help. That's the group that really needs help. I know staff didn't espouse using that particular one, but that's the one that addresses the 2-tier systemness of the STRS benefit package. We need dialogue. If we'd have had some of this dialogue before this meeting, there would be better discussion. The words or the study that was done that gave us the numbers on the number of people in receiving low income or low benefits, that should have received more support from staff to help. And I'm sorry to say that, but we need help and we need staff to be behind us as well as the board to get improvements. 9.8 billion will grow to 12 to 15 billion by the next 2 years if we do nothing. And I just can't imagine people letting a fund that's 3 times the governor's rainy day fund for the whole state go unlooked at and unchanged with no recommendations being made to use it. It's like collecting funds for your community for a charity and then not using the funds, just keep them in a big fund. So, hey, we got millions of dollars here. If you collect it for a purpose, then do that purpose. We need help now.
Chuck, before you speak, we have one of our technicians here. There you go. Hey, Chuck.
The name is Chuck Denon, and I'm retired teacher from the Twin Rivers Unified School District, and was active in many years in working with teachers, and we know about what it takes to negotiate contracts. And first thing I would argue on behalf of the gentleman who just spoke is any plan you put forward should both help those who are the most needy, but it's also wise to recognize that there's a broad base of need out there. But I'd like to comment on something very interesting to me. Did I miss something in the previous item? In the previous item, you spoke about the fact that you couldn't go above 85 because that's what you're statutorily limited. First thing on this motion should be, we ask the legislature to give you authority to go to 90 or 95. You get to decide when and what to do about that. I was shocked that that's not part of the recommendation of the staff, that you should be asking for that authority because you then can deal with it without going back to the legislature every time. Second thing I have a comment about, I sat here through listening to items 3A, 3B, and 3C, and every time I heard, well, inflation, yes, but it's not something we're going to really worry about. Now we come to spending money to help the most needy teachers. And by the way, I will not qualify for anything I'm talking about here. I'm talking on behalf of the many thousands of teachers around the state. In Placer County alone, where I live, I know of at least one 101-year-old teacher, and I know of 60 who are 90 or above. And I don't think any of them have the retirement that's even 50% of what I retired at after my 20 years. So with all due respect, I read your reports and I see it. So, but the final thing, help as many as you can, put a lot of emphasis forward for those that most needy, but get the authority that you can do it as you determine. Because this argument about running out of money, every 2 years for the next 71 years, by the way, I'll be 148 when 2089 comes on. Well, I'm not worried about that, but I am thinking of those who are, and I'm saying every 2 years at the rate you're doing it, you get to revisit this and decide what to do. If there's a change, if there's a need, then deal with that need. But put something on the table today for the teachers that really need it. I could name those that get $10,000 or $12,000 or $15,000 in retirement income, even some that are beyond that, and they don't get Social Security. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Hi, Irene.
Irene Wetzel, CalRTA. Serving as president, I want to dearly thank and humbly thank the board for making that motion and being concerned. And you know, the interesting thing is the people we're concerned about, that's called what, the great generation? There's a silent generation. And so it's like we've got to do for them because they don't complain. That's not within their nature. They're going to make do the best they can. And so the other issue I'd like for you to address as you address all the options is don't do something temporarily, because then, you know, they go ahead and plan for the following year and all of a sudden it's going to be less. So get something that's consistent for them. And CalRTA will work with any of the groups and with you to provide information. But realize these are not internet people. They do not respond to surveys. So it's kind of like a little packet of information. We don't know about them. And so it takes a lot of research. And CalSTRS and the staff really work hard to make that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. Before we hold the vote, I wanted to ask Mark and Nick, did you do any running of numbers with the 3.4 inflation? Or did you just stick with our assumption 275?
We just stuck with your assumption too. Well, I should say we ran 3.5. And at 3.5, the 85% is still sufficient. If you went to, if 375 occurred every year now and in the future, then we'd project to run out of money before 2089.
On the
If we didn't
375.
lower
Okay.
lower it, but so 3.4 is not gonna break the bank at 85%.
And if we take a look at how detrimental, you guys probably didn't. So we've asked for information back, Dave, so I, in the abundance of caution, I think that we also need to look at how, and I think Paul was, part of his comments kind of go this way too, how detrimental it could be for those persons that are receiving it if we drop below the 85. And what kind of impact that could be if things went sideways on us. So let's get both sides of it. So what I think the motion now stands to say is that we would have staff's recommendation to present all the options to the legislature with the recommendation that we would go with no recommendation, we'd attach these, but that we would also voice our desire to have more dialogue with our constituency groups and the people that this would affect, and that, is there more to it, Harry, than that?
Well, I think that
So we might have a
we'll define
recommendation
an
or something?
option through that dialogue.
Yeah.
That,
We would.
a responsible
The board hopes to
option.
make a recommendation to the legislature at that time.
Yeah.
Harry, sound good?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think they have it.
yep, I
Yes.
think they do, I think they have it too,
Maximum
too.
relief to the,
Yeah.
most impacted members without
Absolutely.
compromising the sustainability of the system.
Correct.
Absolutely. And David, if we can get some of that, when we come back with those options, if we can get a side-by-side matrix, because for me, it was hard to go back and forth between these, if we could look at them all,
Yes.
if we could, alrighty. There are no further speakers, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed nay. Any abstentions? Alrighty, thank you very much, we really appreciate it. We are at 12:30, well, 12:35, we are now about 40 minutes behind schedule.
Yeah.
We did have an hour scheduled for lunch. I'd like to cut that to 45 minutes. I'd like to go to lunch now. The cafe closes at 1, and our constituency groups and members of the public would like to, I want to make sure they have an opportunity to go to lunch. We will come back at, say, 1:15. We'll try it 1:15. That is 1:15, right? And take up with 3G. All right, thanks, guys.
Yes.